Excellent. So today, let's see, if you think about Domo itself, is we protect basically some of the most sensitive data in the world. So everything from PII, PHI, financial, medical data, it's all protected in the Domo cloud itself. And from our point of view, we have about 36% of the global Fortune 50. So we spend most of our time talking to some of the largest organizations in the world that have some of the most rigorous requirements in relation to how do you, Domo, protect our data. We have customers in about 70 countries, so we spend a lot of time talking to customers basically in the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, Singapore, and the different countries in relation to what's their data, how is it protected, and then what are some of the controls in place itself. We work across very highly regulated industries, so financial services, government, healthcare itself, whereby there's a tremendous amount of regulations. So what we've done over time is instead of creating like cloud for each of those environments, we've tried to create a cloud instead based on what's the highest level of controls that the government wants us to do, the financial services wants to do, incorporate that across the Domo cloud platform, and then push that across to all of our customers. So every single control that you have in the platform is controls customers have requested that we've baked into the platform. So if you have 5 people on your platform, or you've got 50,000 people on the Domo platform, it's the exact same security controls and models that you can apply across Domo itself. And again, we very much focus in on restricted data. So your most sensitive data, we store a tremendous amount of medical data. We store a tremendous amount of financial data, PII, first name, last name, address, stock, salary, options, children, all of those details are in Domo, and because of that, obviously we're very, very, very much regulated. And we're very much an open platform. We have about 1,000 applications in the Domo platform, and we have about 500 plus connectors. And each of the connectors connect into different cloud platforms and pull back the data itself. So overall, basically, we've tried to build that open ecosystem, very much platform centric, and then very much based on protecting some of the most sensitive data in the industry for some of the largest organizations, like in some of those diverse environments. So it's certainly been like a long and interesting journey along the way. So let's maybe talk about basically the trust program itself. So what is trust? So rather than talking about security, in other words, an antivirus control and an encryption control, we instead talk about trust. So we want our customers to trust us with their data. So what is trust first and foremost? So basically trust, it represents all of our security, all of our compliance, and then all of our privacy controls that are in place to protect your customer data. So we never talk, for most of your interactions with security in Domo, it's always been trust, trust, trust. And we've talked about basically the trust white paper and the trust presentations, and we'll talk about them some more as part of the presentation itself. So it's fine if you think about saying, hey, trust me with your data, but then the problem is trust but verify. You've got to validate that data. So how do we validate basically that we've got the right controls in place to meet our customer requirements, to meet our regulatory requirements, and then to meet legal requirements across the board? So we've gone through, I would say, a tremendous amount of like independent third-party attestation and accreditations. By that I mean having third parties, the likes of E&Y, KPMG, BSI, come on site in Domo, encapsulate, audit our entire environment, and then provide basically attestation reports back to ourselves that we share to customers so that they can meet their requirements. So what do we do? So each year we go through an ISO 27001 certification. ISO 27001 is probably one of the largest, probably the most popular, probably international industry standard. It's probably about 180 plus controls, everything from business continuity to application security to encryption to onboarding to data retention. So we go through the ISO 27001 certification by BSI every year. We go through ISO 27018. So ISO 27018 is slightly different. 27018 is focused in on if you're moving customer data or PII data into a public cloud, so personally identifiable data into a public cloud, then basically 27018 covers the privacy and the security controls you need to have in place to protect first name, last name, all that PII data in a public cloud. So very, very specific itself in relation to privacy and controls that you have in place. We go through a SOC 1. SOC 1 is basically It's a standard by AIPCA, and it's very much basically, many of our customers will use Domo as part of their financial reporting. So there'll be public companies doing end of quarter reporting, and then as part of end of quarter reporting, basically, what they're doing is they're doing the SOC 1 so that they can legally, and from a regulatory point of view, pull the data directly from Domo and then append it or add it basically into their financial reporting back to Wall Street at the end of the quarter. So SOC 1 has certainly been very beneficial, very much requested by customers in relation to how do I basically use Domo for my financial reporting as part of that data life cycle itself. We go through a SOC 2. SOC 2, most people are familiar with that, basically another industry standard itself, very much focusing on general security, privacy, compliance, availability and integrity controls that apply to a SOC 2. So again, that covers basically the whole Domo environment. Anywhere your data is processed, the SOC 2 would apply there. We go through HIPAA, or we go through a HIPAA certification. So every year we do HIPAA security and privacy reviews to make sure basically for our data. So if you think about PHI for personal healthcare information, in the US it needs to be compliant with HIPAA itself. So we take all that HIPAA data, or healthcare data, we put it in our separate healthcare cloud, and then that healthcare cloud is basically where that data is stored and protected. We apply basically all of the regulatory requirements there, plus on top of that we apply basically HIPAA security and data privacy rules, and we do an independent validation of those controls every year as well. We also go through high trust. So high trust is a newer standard, and it's very much more like HIPAA +1. So in other words, HIPAA is very much, here's the general things you should do. High trust is, here's the things you should do, and here's specifically, prescriptively, how you should implement and incorporate those. So the high trust itself is basically very much rigorous in relation to kind of healthcare itself. What else do we do? Internationally, again, we're across 70 plus countries, tremendous amount of data flowing back and forth, so we go through GDPR to make sure obviously we're fully in compliance with GDPR requirements. And last year, Domo went through obviously our full GDPR lifecycle evaluation by an independent third party. Now the issue is, if you think about it, it's fine if you're US-centric, but if you're in another country, the biggest thing is whereby you have a lot of local laws and regulations that will apply to you. And then the question is, the local laws that apply to you, how do they tie back to our SOC 1, our SOC 2, our ISO, and then our other standards that are in place? So what we've done is for certain jurisdictions, namely in this case, we've done it for Australia, for Hong Kong and Singapore, is we've taken their requirements for cloud, we've mapped them directly back to our SOC 1, our SOC 2 and ISO, and then we've made that mapping available to customers. So if you're if you're a customer in Australia, we've got basically the APRA mapping itself of here's the APRA controls, and here's what we've done in Domo, and here's how they were independently validated. So one example is APRA may say you must encrypt data. Now in the ISO 27001, there's controls for encryption, and they've been independently validated by BSI. So we're able to trace back basically many of the local jurisdiction requirements, tie them directly back to our industry certifications, our independent audits, provided to the customers, and then the customers can easily check the box in relation to their requirements, or if they're dealing with regulators in Singapore or Japan or Hong Kong, they can use those. And we've got those primarily for those regions, but we also have those for other regions as well. Plus, as customers come along and for certain areas and they say, well, we're having difficulty getting our regulators to sign up to cloud, what we'll typically do internally is we'll do one of those mappings against our internal controls, make them available to our customer, and then from your point of view, it's a much easier model. So you could do it yourself, and you could spend like 100 hours doing the mapping, but from our point of view, it just makes much more sense to do it once and then share with many, or share it with as many customers as possible. What else do we do? So that's fine for regulatory requirements and assessments. Problem is oftentimes you've got questions. So a question can be, do you have encryption? Yes, I do. Well, what type of encryption? What kind of scheme? What kind of cipher do you use? Where are the encryption keys stored? How do you encrypt data? So for those kind of nuanced questions, we go through the shared assessments questionnaire. So shared assessments is probably I would say probably the leading assessment vehicle for industry questionnaires. It's something that I've co-founded and I've chaired their executive steering committee for a number of years. So shared assessments, the whole ability there is the model whereby it's about 1,500 questions and answers. It's across about 18 different domains. So every imaginable question you can imagine in relation to security, compliance and privacy, it's probably in there somewhere. We created it about 12, 15 years ago down in Charlotte. It took us a week of working during the day and working during the night to get it done. But it was a beast. It was created by Bank of America and the Big Four, but it's got a lot of the questions. You can, if you're sending a questionnaire into a customer itself or basically a vendor, we fill that in once and we share across all of our customers. I'd strongly recommend, like if you're doing like vendor management as part of your process, like if you incorporate shared assessments as part of that, it just makes it much easier because they manage the questionnaires and they manage the output. We also do the Cloud Security Star Questionnaire, and that's about 1,000, it's about 350 questions and answers, and that's very much focused on like multi-tenancy. Tell me about basically how do you separate customer A from customer B? What's the controls that are in place? What's the encryption? How do you manage tenancy? How do you manage authentication? Very nuanced questions in relation to cloud. So if you think about those two alone, that's about 200 questions off the bat, 2,000 questions in relation to security compliance that we've already pre-populated into those questionnaires. And plus as well, what we do is every quarter we do penetration tests of our mobile device itself, and also basically of the full platform, and then we make that available to the customer as well. So we do continuously scans daily, but once every quarter we have an independent third party. They come on site, they spend dozens of weeks basically testing against Domo itself, and then they provide a 1 or 2 page report that shows we've tested Domo, and here's the number of high vulnerabilities, medium vulnerabilities or low vulnerabilities that are in the platform. So again, this is something we've spent a lot of time in relation from the compliance point of view, down to the international side, down into what are the questionnaires, questions that customers ask, and then down into basically the independent penetration testing report. And overall, I would probably say we'd probably do at least about probably 600 person weeks of assessments per year, and so we spend a tremendous amount of time on we've got the trust, and then on the validation, then on the compliance side as well. And then as we go into new region or new customers and new requirements, we continuously evolve and change those programs. So one example alone talking about is like in the last year alone, we added basically ISO 27001, 27018, GDPR, and then the mappings all for the first time. And apart from that, every one of those was refreshed as well from there. So it's a level of compliance that we've gone through, certainly that I would say very few kind of cloud providers in the industry have gone through so far. So let's move from compliance to like, how does your data protected? So what is the security of that data look like? What is secure by design look from there? So first of all, basically, probably most important question you think about basically apart from security is, where's my data actually stored? So we've got a number of different kind of data centers and regions. So primarily we use AWS. I'd say the vast majority of our customers are on AWS. And we have a choice there. We use US East Coast, which is Virginia, Dublin, Ireland, so you're within the European Union, Australia, and then Japan itself. So they're the main 4 kind of regions that people choose of either the America, Europe, Australia, or Japan, and then we're continuously adding new data centers in different regions as well. And primarily we operate off AWS. Some of our customers decide they want to use Azure instead, and that's purely bound to either contractual preferences, or they may not want to do business with Amazon because of obviously they're competing with Amazon itself. So in those cases, many of our customers are in Azure, and that's in the US East Coast region as well. And then we've got a kind of a back-end data tier kind of management platform, and that's kind of an environment we have in East Coast as well, and that's something that's a co-location that Domo kind of owns and manages themselves. But if you think about it from your data, from your perspective, the vast majority of your data will probably be in the US East Coast region itself, and then for those maybe in Asia, it could be in Australia, Japan, and then for Europe, they generally opt for Dublin, Ireland instead. So that's the general location. What's this multi-tenancy? So you know where the location of your data is. Next question really is how is it protected? So This is kind of generally kind of a high-level overview itself. You heard the different teams over the last couple of days talking about Adrenaline, which is a fast query engine, and then Vault is where your data is stored. So generally the way it works is basically we've got what's known as connectors, and connectors, the 550 connectors, they go out to public websites. So they'll go to Box, Dropbox, Salesforce, Google, whatever you wanted. They'll pull data back. They'll collect it, they'll transform it itself into a certain format, and then they'll store it in the raw data storage, which is Vault, where it's encrypted. So we pull the database using connectors, we transform it within the system and service itself, and then we store it basically within the Vault service itself where it's stored. And then similarly, if you want to copy data from your internal environment into Domo, you deploy Domo Workbench in your environment. You'd own it, you'd manage it, we wouldn't have any access to it, and then you push data into Domo itself. Again, it goes through a collection mechanism, goes into raw data storage, and that's stored. And then when you access it using a web browser, you access it using a mobile device, it comes in obviously to the internet, through that visualization layer, and then it goes to the fast query engine, i.e. Adrenaline, and then you view your data. So at a high level architecture, we pull the data in, we transform it, we store it, and then at the opposite side, basically, when you access it through the visualization layer. You go to Adrenaline, which is a fast query in-memory engine, and then basically you visualize the data on your Mac or your iOS or whatever device you're using itself. So that's the general high-level kind of architecture. It's either connectors, you pull it in through it, you might pull it in through Workbench, or else you might pull it in through APIs, but it's the same mechanism itself. So what are some of the controls that apply there? So one would be in relation to physical. So physical, pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Secure data centers, 24/7 security guards, SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO. It's got biometrics to get in, irises and handprints. It's got man traps that lock you into the cages themselves, or lock you in if you haven't authorized twice across the board. And it's a very secure environment, generally either our colo data centers or basically AWS. And again, it's gone through an independent validation. Network is something we spend a lot of time in, so we continuously scanning the network, looking for, is there vulnerabilities in the network, in the application, in the system, in the services, making sure that it's secure, doing that scanning. We spend a lot of time basically locking down the services, so we deploy basically network-based firewalls and then host-based firewalls as well. So if you think about Domo and you say, well, how many firewalls are in Domo? There's probably hundreds of thousands, because every single device in Domo in the data center has its own host-based firewall as well as network. So if you think about it from a security point of view, it's generally like traffic comes in, it goes to AWS, it goes to an access control list on the exterior, then it goes to security groups themselves, and then it goes through host-based firewalls. So there's about 3 or 4 layers at least of firewalls before every single connection terminates on a host device itself. And we spend a lot of time locking down those rules to make sure it's the least privilege rules themselves. Everything that happens there, we take all those data logs and then we copy those basically to Splunk and basically to Sumo Logic. So we use 2 SIMs, Splunk and Sumo Logic, and we're continuously looking for patterns of use and misuse. That's all processed then in American Fork. We have a security operations center there. It's managed by full-time employees, and they're continuously monitoring basically those SIMs for any traffic. So anything unusual on the application, the systems, the service, the network itself, what happens is it gets reported into the SIM, and then it gets reported into the SOC, and then if there's something that's specific, we've got a contractual notification requirement to notify you within 24 hours. So within 24 hours, we'll pick up the phone, we'll ring your security operations center, your incident response, and say, oh, by the way, we've spotted something unusual on your platform. Generally, for the most part, if we spot something unusual, we'll generally pick up the phone and give you a call within 10-15 minutes. That's probably what we've typically seen across the board. Applications. So application security is key, because if you think about it, it's a cloud. A cloud is an application. An application has millions of lines of code. So if you've got a vulnerability in the code, you've got a vulnerability in the application, and the application is externally accessible. So we do continuous threat assessments. Every single feature that you saw on the screen over the last 2 days, it's all gone through a security review, and it's all gone through a security third-party assessment itself. We assign a security lead, an engineer, an architect to that. We basically do static and dynamic code analysis. So as the code is written, every single day basically we'll do static. In other words, we'll look for certain signatures, and we'll do dynamic. We'll come in externally and we'll scan it. So if you think about it, if we're doing that every day at least, most times we're doing it twice a day, and it takes like 2 months to ship code. That's like 60 times it goes through static code analysis, and 60 times it goes through a dynamic code analysis, even before it's shipped itself and it goes live. So we spend a lot of time there. Bug bounties, so we've got internal red team testing, we've got external bug bounty programs, we've got internal bug bounty programs, we've got red teaming itself. So we spend a lot of time paying people for finding vulnerabilities in our service. I would say a tremendous amount of time. We spend at least every quarter, we spend about, I think there's something like 60 person weeks of paying people independently to go find vulnerabilities in Domo. And then if they find a high, a medium, or low, then we'll pay them for those itself. So that's been very successful because it's engaged basically that peer review community. It's just not us validating or the customer, i.e. yourself, or someone like NCC or Mandiant penetration. It's the real life penetration testers from Czechoslovakia, from India, from Ireland, from London, from the US, continuously testing the site, finding issues, and then coming back to Domo. Encryption. All of your data at rest is encrypted, and then all your data in transit is encrypted as well. So we spend a lot of time kind of building those encryption controls. And you've got the ability of, there's a number of different ways of encryption. One is you can use default encryption if you think about Vault, where your data is stored, is generally, in AWS, it's generally S3, which is like the storage mechanism. All of that is encrypted by default. If you wanted to use Workbench, you also have the ability to turn on encryption as well. So you encrypt everything that goes through Workbench as well, that's installed, that's updated into the Domo instance itself. So Workbench is very powerful for encryption. And then the final one is something we launched about 1.5 years ago called BYOK, or Bring Your Own Key. And that talks about, and I'll talk about that actually next, what it is and what's the feature of that. But the whole capability is we either do it naturally by default, or else you can do encryption through Workbench, or else some of our customers have gone through BYOK. And I'll talk more about BYOK, what it is, what's the keying mechanism, and then why it's a strong option for many of our customers. And then finally, basically, user access itself. We go through a process of, if you think about it, at the end of the day, Domo has very little access into your customer instance, and we shouldn't, because we don't need it for the most part. But what happens basically if you log a call into Domo and basically you have an issue, and you can't replicate it, we can't replicate it, and you want us to log into production to validate that. Well then, in that case, we've got what's known as the customer support, or the Domo support account, and that's used by customer support to access customer instances. Now, the good thing about that is you've got the ability to disable that when you want. So what you could do is on the Domo support account in your customer instance, you can disable that so Domo's customer support doesn't have access. And then when you need access, when there's an issue, then you can enable it for 30 minutes and then close it directly after. So it's like, instead of having that door that's semi-locked, you can lock that the whole time and just lock Domo out fully. When you give us access for those 30 minutes to validate what you want us to look at, we just make sure that everybody's gone through, it's the right people, they're in customer support, they've gone through background checks itself, they've gone through rigorous training, they're accessing it through jump boxes and multi-factor authentication. So they're not accessing your customer instance directly, they're going through like a VCR, or virtual clean environment, which basically allows them to access the data, but doesn't allow them the ability to take that data and then copy it down into their laptop or print it or put it on a USB and walk away with that. So we spent a lot of time on basically how do we abstract basically the customer support laptops from production, whereby they can access the data, but they can't copy it, they can't print it, they can't USB it, they can't save it locally. Again, it's like, your data is only secure in production, and that's the best place to keep that itself. And again, everything that happens in the customer instance is logged, and we'll talk more about the user activity logs and what you can see, but every single action in Domo, it's logged, it's in the customer instance logs, and you can consume that. And I'll talk about what are the different ways you can consume that. And it's a very important one as well for logging, because you want to log the right things, but logs, for the most part, they're almost a dead pool. They're out in the corner. You want to make them actionable. So I'll talk more about basically later on, how do you make those logs actionable? So That's fine in relation to the infrastructure or the whole environment itself. Another one we've launched recently, and I'll just spend maybe just a couple of minutes on this, is what's known as Whisperbeam. So Whisperbeam, the thing about cloud is great from a SaaS point of view, but you don't have the ability from a customer perspective to look at basically what's happening in the underlying AWS infrastructure. So like, are they encrypting the data? They say they are, but I don't know. Are they putting all the data in a secure network? You know, they say they are, but I don't know. So what we've done is we've developed Whisperbeam, and what it does is that it goes into the underlying AWS infrastructure, and it does thousands of tests per second against every single host in Domo to validate that it meets our security checklist. And then what it does, it takes all of that data, it puts it in dashboards, and it makes it available in Domo. So what happens for me, certainly every morning, we've Whisperbeam running on the Domo, all of our Domo instances internally, is that I can pull out my mobile device at any time, I can click on it, and straight away I can find out what level of compliance or not do we have in AWS against industry hardening standards. And if they fall out of compliance, my mobile phone starts buzzing, I pick it up and I can see it straight away. Very important, and why? Because think about it, it's like the Golden Gate Bridge. Like, you know, you start painting on one side, and by the time you get to the other side and you finish painting it, it's taken so long to do it, you've got to go back to the start and you've got to paint it as well. Exact same thing with AWS. AWS moves so fast. What happens is in AWS, it's continuously changing. Containerization is continuously changing. So if you've got to do an audit and it takes you a month to do an audit, then everything has changed 100 times since. So the good thing about this Whisperbeam is it allows us visibility into every single host that's in Domo. It allows us basically to visualize that in Domo in cards. It allows us to access it using the mobile device. So as we make changes in Domo infrastructure, within a millisecond, we've got real-time feedback on, like, are we meeting the hardening and industry security requirements. That's available currently basically within the Domo platform that we're using in Domo instances, and then the plan certainly in Q2, Q3 is to make that available certainly to customers. So customers have the ability to use Whisperbeam to look at is Domo securing the hardening, are they locking down the instances according to their requirements. And if you think about this, it's really the holy grail. How do I move from SOC 1 and SOC 2s and ISOs? And instead, how do I move to the model basically of continuous monitoring of a SaaS provider? And that's what everybody wants. Nobody wants to do it once a year, once every 6 months. Because think about it, if you audit a SaaS provider, maybe once a year, in that year time frame, they've changed their entire technology stack and they've changed the product 100 times over. So this really gives the ability to find out, is my security being degraded at any point, and then kind of getting that real-time feedback. Angel.
Will that alert you when there's someone that's just an obviously you can't see?
Not that one. But what it will, there's the count activity logs will do that. So I'll talk about basically how that works and how you get the feedback from there. So the two good things for monitoring would be the count activity logs that you normally see, and that manages basically malicious behavior itself. And this is purely on the configuration side. Is the system configured securely itself? Does it have the right? And we have a list of about 50 controls in place itself. So this is hardness, lock it down itself within Whisperbeam, and then the user activity means that once it's hardened and locked down, if somebody does something suspicious there, how would I know about that and how can I consume that itself? And there's a slide that I'll spend more and more time about basically like what you should be looking for, and then how do you integrate that into your security operations center? So, good question. So what are some of the, so we talked about the platform and the security model. What are some of the other security features that are available? You can turn them on or turn them off if you like, but they're certainly kind of available within that service itself. So one is BYOK, bring your own key model. And the BYOK model is basically, it came from many of our customers saying, hey Niall, for the last 2 years, I want to be able to manage my own encryption key. It's my data, it's my customer instance, I want to manage encryption. And I said, sure, it makes logical sense. It's the equivalent of like, an analogy would be imagine you hired a vendor, maybe like a gardener or whatever else, and they had the key of your house to get in and get out, and they could come and go whenever they wanted if you get into your house, but you didn't have that key. So it doesn't exactly build that trust model. It doesn't make sense. Similarly in cloud, it was the cloud provider had the encryption key, but you didn't have the encryption key, but they had it and they could access your data whenever you want. Doesn't make sense. That's specifically why we created BYOK. And the way it works is there's two encryption keys. There's a key encryption key and there's a data encryption key. Imagine like two halves of the key. And they use the technology, what's known as encryption enveloping. But at a high level, it means that to encrypt any single component of your data in Domo, it needs two keys. It needs the key encryption key and the data encryption key to come together. And it's only then that single byte of data can be decrypted across the board. Why is that relevant? Well, what happens then is that the KEK key is stored by yourself on your environment, on your key management server, and then we've got the data encryption key in Domo. So we've got access to the data encryption key on our side, and you have access to the KEK on your side, which means that there's separation of duties. Both of the keys need to come together, and both parties need to agree on that. So what actually happens is that we take all of that data, it's encrypted to data encryption key, which is encrypted to corresponding key encryption key. The good thing about that model, it gives you the capability at any time is if you revoke the KEK key on your side, what happens is within milliseconds, every single component of data, so imagine if you had terabytes of data in Domo, within a millisecond, that terabytes of data in Domo, it becomes an encrypted blob, and then nobody's got access to that. So it's very, very powerful. And before, what would happen is if a key went missing, you call the provider and say, oh, by the way, we think there's been an issue. Can you encrypt my data or can you delete my data? Oh, sure we can. It'll take us 30 days to do it. And you know, like 30 days in a security issue is a lifetime. Like the horse has left the barn at that point. So you want millisecond response. Beautiful thing about, and many of our largest customers have deployed BYOK. Beautiful thing about this model, it's an arbitrary decision. Hey, it's your data. You can make any decision what you want. All you literally do is you revoke the KEK key, and immediately, like everything in Domo becomes an encrypted blob, and then nobody has access to that key. So it really gives the power back to the customer to manage and control their data. Another powerful mechanism of this, and this is something whereby, we designed this, I patented this basically, no other cloud provider has this itself, but the very powerful model is most cloud providers use one encryption key per year. Or for the most part, maybe one encryption key every 2 or 3 years, because changing encryption keys is difficult. And if you dig deep with your cloud vendors and say, guys, how often do you actually rotate your encryption key? 9 times out of 10 it'll be, we do it once a year, or we do it every 3 years, or we haven't done it yet. And that's the typical model itself. What we've done is, the problem there is if you steal an encryption key, you've access to 3 years worth of data. It's game over. You steal the data, you steal the key, gone. And now you've got to basically report to like 2, 3, 4, 5 million people. 2, 3, 4, 5 million by credit reporting, by fines, by contact. It's huge. So what we did is basically we created the one key per hour model. So what happens in BYOK, every single hour we create a new encryption key. Every 24 hours, that's 24 encryption keys. Every year, that's 8,760 hours or 8,760 encryption keys. An average card is probably made up of 1,000 parts of data. So your average card you view in data has 1,000 encryption keys associated with that. So now think about it. Before you stole one encryption key, you'd access to 3 years worth of data. With this model, you steal one encryption key and you have access to less than 1 hour's worth of data. Now instead of notifying basically those 2 or 3 million people, you're notifying 2 or 3 people. So it's a very, very strong model in that every time you look at it, it's a new encryption key, new encryption key, new encryption key, new encryption key. Something no other industry provider has out there. Many of our largest financial institutions have gone down that BYOK route, gives them instant control. Hey, I've got a concern, revoke the KEK, Domo doesn't have any access. Somebody compromises Domo or compromises anybody across the board, they steal one encryption key, makes a difference, but probably not an awful lot of difference from there. So, and for a hacker to try to work out, this is how the data is, this is how I build it back up again, and this is how I put the 8,760 encryption keys together, chances of them doing that is very, very low. So again, it's building, every system is hackable, but you want to make it much more difficult for somebody to compromise your environment. BYOK, again, it's an option and certainly something that can be turned on. Another one is federated queries. So many of our customers, I wouldn't say many, but certainly a certain portion, they've got concerns about basically they don't want the data to leave their premises. So they want to use Domo, but they want the data to remain on their own on-premise environment. So what we do is we use a federated query. So it's the service we install on the customer side, a bit like Workbench. And then there's a corresponding service in Domo itself. And what happens is when you query using a mobile device or laptop, when you query a certain data, our system goes to your system, your federated query, and says, by the way, can you send me all the information from Niall Browne? It's sent across the wire, it's sent through Domo itself, it's sent in through Domo itself to our hundreds of boxes. You set a TTL on it. I want this data to live for 3 seconds. So it's ephemeral through data, Domo, and then I get to see it in my mobile device. So federated queries is a way whereby you can use the Domo platform to access your data on your own internal environment. Yet at the same time, the data remains in your environment, never gets sent to Domo apart from like the transfer, like the internet as it goes through, and everything remains stored in your environment. It's an option again. I would probably say the customers that would generally offer this are more on the government side, but again, it's more the model whereby they want the data in their environment. They don't want to copy it anywhere else, but they want all the functionality of Domo. So federated query is another kind of option that's available to customers. So let's maybe jump away from like, here's all the controls that we control, to like, here's what you control itself. And it's important. Why? Because basically, you really want to we want to basically design the service so that basically you can manage the data according to your own requirements. So simple as this, it's your data, it's your customer instance, you should be able to manage according to your own data governance requirements themselves. And this is something that I spend a lot of time kind of working on, is within, how do we ensure basically that customers have the right functionality. So the worst thing in the world, everyone knows that, most people know the shared responsibility model. It's like, I'm responsible for X, you're responsible for Y. But if I don't give you the tools to manage your service correctly, it just literally means that I'm pushing responsibility to you, and it's a cop-out at the end of the day, which isn't good. So every cloud provider that should be doing good should be giving the customers the ability to manage literally 99% of the functionality in your own service according to your own requirements. So it's a hands-off model from Domo. You can manage the full stack. So if you think about it, generally you're thinking about that in relation to like, data governance. How do I govern my data in Domo itself? And I break it into like, the 3 different A's. So one is authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication is basically, am I allowed in the front door into your house? Authorization is once I'm in there, what rooms am I allowed to go to? And then accounting means that once I'm in there, who's monitoring me? Is it like an Arlo? Is it a Nest? Whatever. So authentication is basically, can I get in the front door? Authorization, what can I do once I'm in there? And accounting is like, who's monitoring me itself? And if you break customer security into the simple AAA model, it makes an awful lot more sense apart from this abstract kind of concept out there. So authentication is we can manage credentials in Domo. For the most part, we don't, and we don't want to. Most times customers want to manage their own, and the way it works is pretty simple. Is they might use like an LDAP or an Active Directory server. That then talks to an identity provider. So you might use Okta or OneLogin or Google Cloud for authentication, or Ping, or any of those services themselves. So it means that you log in once to them, and then you're showed an array of cloud services you can log into. They then use single sign-on. Single sign-on basically allows the single sign-on from your environment. So the good thing about the single sign-on is you can use whatever you want in Domo. So you can use OpenID Connect, you can use SAML itself, or you can use OAuth itself. So 3 kind of core services you can provide. So the benefit of that is basically, is in that model of authentication, you control the front door. Anytime anybody tries to get into Domo, we don't have a password. Nobody can steal your password because we don't have it. So it simply means that every time somebody wants to go into Domo, they first get directed to you. You authenticate each individual user, and then you allow them into that Domo service from there. So it's very powerful, whereby, for the most part, you want to manage. You want to be the doorman at the door. You want to manage basically the identity and the individuals itself. So single sign-on authentication literally means basically, from a very, very strong perspective, it means that you get to manage your identity itself within that service. And I think the vast majority of customers are moving down that route, using an identity provider, the Oktas, the OneLogins, the Ping. And also you want to make sure you're deploying multi-factor authentication. So if you're in the cloud and you're not deploying multi-factor authentication, for the most part, you're almost an accident waiting to happen. No doubt whatsoever, because, and I've been CSO of cloud providers in Silicon Valley for the last 15 years. I've gone through, I'd say, hundreds of customer breaches down through the years. And I would say 99% of the time it's whereby somebody's phished the credentials of the end user itself in the customer environment, and they've used that to log into whatever customer or whatever basic company it is across the board. So, and some people say, well, let's just turn on MFA for administrators. Well, hackers are smart. They move from administrators down to users, and they'll keep on going down the factor chain. How do they find out? They just go to LinkedIn, and they find out, they'll map an entire organization in seconds, and they'll be able to go through the whole identity. They'll be able to phish the users. And I've seen scenarios whereby they'll target a company, they'll send out phishing links, and generally what phishing is like, if you send out a phishing link, there's about 15-20% chance that that person is going to click on the link. So you send out 10 emails, at least 2 people are going to click on that link. You send out 100 emails, 10 people are going to click on the link. Now you own 10 people. So imagine let's just say you keep on doing that and you've done that for 100 people in the company. You've phished 100 accounts. That's great. What do you do with them? Well, then all you literally do is you wait and you think about, you look at that system, what does it do? Well, maybe it does payroll. At the end of 2 weeks, everybody gets paid. So what you will typically do then is you've got your phished 100 accounts. You wait until 5 minutes past 12, basically, before the end of the month itself. You log in as those 100 people. Again, it's all APIs, it's all scripted. You change the account numbers themselves for those 100 people. And then suddenly, basically, all of their payroll for those 100 people gets transferred into Western Union in Europe itself, and then the money's gone. And then you as the hacker log in 2 minutes later at 5 past 12, and you change it back to the normal account number. Everybody comes in the next morning, they haven't got paid, they look at payroll looks normal, they start chat to HR, they chat to payroll, they chat to HR, they chat to payroll, they're wasting time, Western Union, money's gone across the board. I've seen that happen dozens of times across the board. And it's always the case whereby when you steal a phishing account at the moment, you think they might use it immediately. They'll wait. I mean, they'll wait for days, weeks, months until the right time, and they know they've got one chance in it. So that's why they'll find out what's the worst thing they can do in your system to monetize it and to steal the data back itself. And that's why, deploying, single sign-on, certainly deploying MFA is absolutely critical in any organization. If you don't deploy MFA, you will be owned absolutely 100% of the time. And I've seen that happen in every organization itself. But that's kind of almost hitting a tangent itself. But again, in Domo model itself for authentication, for single sign-on, whichever method they want to use is fully supported. Let's say once you're in there, authentication? Let's maybe take a look at other controls. What you can also do on the operation side is you can tie it back into Domo. So you can allow Domo access from anywhere in the world, or you can tie it back to specific IP addresses. You can tie it back, you can only allow access from Verizon or from Bank of America or from Morgan Stanley. So you can allow access, you can allow only the people to get access to Domo from trusted IP addresses, or you can make it available from the internet. When somebody sends an invite, you don't want them to send an invite to Gmail. You want them to send an invite from your company name, so companyname.com. You can lock that down as well on the whitelist. So you can lock down which IP addresses can get into Domo, and then when somebody's sending an invite itself, from the invite perspective, what company name they can use. And it sounds pretty trivial, but oftentimes you'll find out, you look at Domo or any service and say, hang on, this is just intended to be for people in my company. And then suddenly people are sharing, it's like Box, and they're sharing links with everybody across the board. So again, you tie it back, you can tie it down to your company itself. They need to have a valid account before they can get in.
Can you do the whitelisting by geo, by location?
You can't. It's a pretty default model at the moment. You either turn it on or turn it off. We're having conversations at the moment, basically. Would we do it basically on a region or on a per department level? Like, in other words, could engineering only come in from these IP addresses and that? And we're also looking, there's ability in Domo, we can geolocate the data, we're having that. So I think that should probably come in the future. But for the moment, it's either, good question, it's turn it on or turn it off. Authorization, very powerful as well. So you can create like different, you've got the default groups itself, like admin, privilege, editor, participant groups themselves. You can create custom groups in Domo. So as well as those groups, you can create other groups itself for engineering or for sales or for admins and give them different permissions as well. The nice thing as well, that is what I think Adam talked about yesterday, was the concept of like dynamic groups, which is very, very powerful. So the way dynamic groups is, if you think about it, if you're in a company and you might change departments on an ongoing basis, and as people change departments, they have different levels of permissions. So if someone's moving from engineering to customer support, well then, hang on a second, you don't want to give them access to engineering resources, you want to give them access to customer support resources, totally different set of resources. But then the problem is, do I manage it in my own environment, my customer environment, or do I manage it in Domo itself? How do I, and then if I manage it in my customer environment, do I need to log into Domo? And then if I've got 200 cloud providers out there, do I need to log into each of those? So what we did is we came up basically with dynamic grouping. And the way it works is, if you think about it, every time somebody logs on single sign-on, it sends certain attributes over to Domo. It says, can you log in, Niall? It's Niall Browne. I work in engineering. I'm SVP. And here's my email address. So it sends these attributes every time I log into Domo itself. What we can do is we take those attributes and we created trusted attributes off them. So we say the trusted attribute in this case is the group engineering. So next to my login, it says engineering, sees engineering in the single sign-on, looks at the dynamic group and says, hey, Niall's in engineering, let's put him in an engineering group in Domo, done. Now, if I'm in engineering and suddenly I transfer into operations tomorrow morning, what happens is the next time, so I'll transfer into operations, the next time I log in, same thing, Samuel will log in the attribute, instead of engineering, it will say operations. Now we'll go to my account in Domo, Niall Browne, engineering, oh, it should be operations. And then dynamically it'll change my user in the group and then change all my permissions. So within milliseconds, and it's very, very powerful. It just means basically, as you transfer, as you terminate people, as you give them more responsibility, every time they log into Domo, within milliseconds of it happening itself, it's a whole new different user experience. Before I logged in, I could see all my Jiras and the engineering cycles, and now I've transferred to operations, and I see operations kind of onboarding instead. So very, very powerful, really gives the ability to kind of customize those users. Sorry, Angel.
So can you add another attribute?
Yeah.
So right now, I think I'm only pulling in email address. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's at least 7 attributes that you can send on every SAML or single assertion or markup or single sign-on itself. So you can define any of those 7 itself, and then you can specify which of those do you want to be used as. Sorry? You would just create it. So from your end, it's your identity provider that's sending it over to us. So on the single sign-on, you would just add that attribute onto the single sign-on, so it would be sent over. So it's for them, and they can send, and it's different from other companies. Some people might send first name, last name, phone numbers, or they might send basically social security number. You know, it all depends itself. So it's fully customized on your side, and then you decide which ones of those attributes are the key factor for making decisions. So. And then PDP kind of talks more into, like, you know, you tie everybody into dynamic group, and once you're into a group, then on PDP, we can tie access down on the row level. So if you think about it, the lowest level the lowest level access on any environment is at the row level itself, and you just can't get any lower at that. And if you think about, like, typically you might have, like, you know, 50 million rows in Domo, so you can tie it down to a very specific row level, and you can say, hey, Niall works in US. Therefore, I get access to X, and then if somebody else, my correspondent working in Japan, he would get access to Y. So you can really kind of diverge basically what every single user, what every single group has at a very finite level, at the group level. So PDP as it relates to cards is very, very powerful, because you can have the same data, but 10 people are viewing it, there's 10 different PDP profiles, and 10 different people are seeing 10 different things. Very powerful itself on the PDP, and you can customize that as much as you want. And then finally, we talked about authentication, authorization, accounting. Accounting is, and this goes back, kind of Angel, to your question itself, is basically everything that happens in the Domo customer instance is logged. So if I log in, it's logged. If I fail to log in, it's logged. If I view something, it's logged. If I edit something, it's logged. Everything is logged, which is very, very powerful. Everything is viewable within the customer instance. You log into as admin, you log into your customer instance logs, and you can see what everybody can do. That's fine, but that's like a bank statement. You know, you look at a bank statement, a yearly bank statement, you can't make sense of it. Like, what's $12 here and $6 there? It's just lines, doesn't make sense. And it's not actionable. Something has to happen before you go to logs and you do something. So what you can do is, there's a Domo activity log API. So it's just APIs, domo.com/v1/audit. And if you go to Domo and you type in activity log, it shows you all the different commands there. What you can do is you can get your security operations center, i.e. your SIM, ArcSight, Sumo Logic, Splunk, Alien Vault, point it at that API, give it a cred, you pull down the data itself, and then basically from that end, you now have the data. Now if it's Splunk or whatever else, you can create rules. You can say, well, if somebody tries to log in 5 times in a row with the wrong password, well then tell me about it. Going back to the early case of somebody changing payroll, if somebody logs in and they change payroll in Domo itself, tell me about it. Tell me basically if more than 2 people change payroll and the payroll account number is the same. Well, that's kind of suspicious. Tell me about it. What happens if basically if somebody as an administrator adds another administrator into Domo? Tell me about it. So again, it's very powerful, because like everything that happens in Domo is logged. Everything is accessible through an API. Then in your security operations center, you point it at the API, you pull down the data, and straight away within milliseconds, you know exactly what's happening in that environment. You know basically who's doing what, and you've configured your SIM. And the great thing about that is you probably have done it already. You'll probably have your security operations center configured for Salesforce or for Workday or for Box. So Domo is just an extension of that. You just pull the Domo API down, you apply the same signatures, modify them slightly, and straight away you've got 24/7 visibility. Something goes wrong, and then your whole security operations center, their pagers go off on pager duty, and they can jump on that. So again, it's the ability whereby, if you think about it, the 2 biggest concerns when you move to a cloud is, A, are you losing control? And then B, what about transparency? Control, you've got an authentication, authorization, you've got this full level of control, Domo doesn't have any access, and you manage it all. And then transparency, you have it in accounting, whereby you're able to tie access, you're able to tie every action directly back to a user, and all of that is consumed directly into your environment itself.
Are alerts supported with that?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. You can configure alerts natively within Domo itself for certain kind of actions as well. And so it's the 3 options. One would be the credit card reporting, you log into Domo. 2, you configure the alerts, or else 3, basically, you use basically the API. More and more people are using the API and the SIM, because having somebody log into Domo once every quarter to look at the logs, just doesn't make sense. If they can get it real time, and they can pull the logs back every millisecond, it just means something happens, and straight away, they can react as well. So that's pretty much it, at the very high level itself. We talked about basically what are the controls we manage. We talked about the controls basically kind of that you can manage yourself, some of the functionality, some of the features themselves. And really, as I said, from our point of view, we store a lot of data, and the reason we store so much restricted data is we spend a tremendous amount of time kind of working with customers on what are your security, what are your compliance requirements. And again, I would say, without basically kind of our trust of our customers on can we protect that data, we would not have a business. And certainly from my perspective and from the company's perspective, it's something we invest an awful lot of time in relation to how do we protect that data from there. With that, any questions? Sorry.
Earlier you mentioned, having the same, quality
have a separate environment that we're
Yeah.
supposed to do that in, or is, if everything is the same?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think probably what you did is you probably got half the answer, and half the answer was you can't store PII in Domo unless you do X, and the X is part of the contractual terms that you're permitted to store PII itself. And the reason we do that is we do that for certain categories of data for like credit cards. So one thing is we explicitly don't want to take credit cards, so we're not PCI compliant. So we don't allow that. Similarly as well, if somebody wants to copy us medical data in our healthcare provider, we say, right, sure, you can give us your healthcare data, but you need to sign a BA, or basically a BA, Business Associate Agreement. So I think what happened there is you probably got half the story. You can copy PII, but if it's for healthcare, is it?
We're not like for a financial.
Yeah. If it's not healthcare, then you got the wrong answer. If you want to copy PII, it goes into the Domo generic cloud. All the controls apply. The only difference is it doesn't have HIPAA and it doesn't have high trust. Apart from that, it's a generic controls. Apologies. Any other questions? About what? Oh, the kill switch. Oh, yeah. So the kill switch is basically within BYOK is when you drop the encryption key. This is slightly technical, but when you drop the encryption key, the issue is it only encrypts it only makes the data that's at rest unavailable. The problem in modern environments is nobody's doing it in rest anymore. Everyone's doing it in memory. So if you look at all the cloud providers, everything is in memory. So if we just basically made the data in rest unavailable in storage, you probably have like 30% of the equation because everything's in memory. 70% of the risk is there. So at the same time you revoke the KET key, it sends a kill switch to the thousands of boxes there and says drop the data in memory as well. So it just means basically that when you revoke that encryption key, all your data at rest and in memory is revoked at the same time. It's one of those secrets basically that in tech whereby people say, we'll just encrypt the data at rest and or we'll delete the data at rest or we'll revoke it and that's fine. It's not, because if you look at like SAP, they have a HANA-based system. Most systems now are using in-memory. So if you think about it from a security point of view, and I think it's almost like chasing the rabbit model itself. Is it data in rest? Is it in transit? It's all about memory. So most of the security controls now that need to apply across the industry is that data in memory, because it's in memory, it's on thousands of servers itself, and then how is it being protected? And I think, I think there's going to be almost a catch-up in relation to security for the whole industry to realize in memory is where it's all happening at the moment. So.
Do you know if Domo charges anything more for BYOK?
If you've got an enterprise license, it's for free. So once you've got enterprise, you have the option of turning it on. If you're interested, feel free to ping me or CS. And we have it's one of my kind of the passions, getting customers in BYOK. So I'd be more than interested in that. Excellent. Sounds good. That's great. Thanks all. Appreciate it. Thank you.